And then, oh, we're live on Facebook. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and start, even though it's a little early. Just a tiny spoiler alert. It is storming where I am. So if you hear a boom, or if you see my cat Zora jump on me, it's because it's storming and she's a little scared. But other than that, happy August, Augustonians. I hope that you are all managing to stay cool. Welcome back, and welcome to those of you joining me for the first time. My name is Jessica Lene, and I am the literary curator at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, as well as the host and curator of this program, Lit Friday. I want to send a huge thank you to Micaiah Johnson for joining us last month. On September 24th, we're going to welcome Anais Duplin to join us for a discussion of his publication, Black Space, on the Poetics of an Afrofuture. Also, in partnership with the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books, we have opened submissions to our For August one-act play competition. We are accepting one-act scripts, which are 10 to 15 minutes in length, from BIPOC writers, actors, and actresses that focus on Appalachian, Midwestern, and Western Pennsylvania narratives. 2 winners will be chosen, and the prize includes a high-quality recording of their one-act production and an honorarium. Malcolm Tarek, the award-winning poet and playwright, will be the finalist judge. The deadline is October 1st, and we will post the link to those submissions across social media after this Lit Friday. And now I'm very excited to welcome the poet and amazing editor and one of the funniest people I know, Dustin Pearson. Dustin Pearson is the author of the forthcoming A Season in Hell with Rimbaud from BOA Editions, coming out in 2022. Millennial Roost from CNR Press, which was published in 2018, and A Family is a House from CNR Press as well in 2019. These are the books. If you haven't gotten them, go into CNR Press and get them, or go to Dustin's author website and hit him up. He may have his own copies, as we usually do. Dustin is a McKnight Doctoral Fellow in Creative Writing at Florida State University. He's currently in Tulsa, Oklahoma, doing a visiting professorship. Congratulations. He's also the recipient of fellowships from Cave Canem, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing, and the Anderson Center at Tower View. Pearson has also served as the editor of Hayden's Ferry Review and has been the director of the Clemson Literary Festival. He won the Academy of American Poets Catherine C. Turner Prize and John McKay Graduate Award. He also holds an MFA from Arizona State University. He is the recipient of a 2021, congratulations again, Pushcart Prize. His work also appears in The Nation, Poetry Northwest, Blackbird, Vinyl Poetry, The Boiler, Honey Literary, Bennington Review, Tri-Quarterly, The Literary Review, The Cortland Review, Poetry Daily, Hayden's Ferry Review, and I'm sure very soon, many other places. Welcome, Dustin, and thank you for spending some time with us this evening.
Oh, thank you, and thanks to everybody who's here.
Are you gonna read across the books, or are you just gonna read from one?
I'll read primarily from Family is a House, and then I'll close with the title poem from my forthcoming collection.
Okay. I'm gonna go away so you guys can focus on Dustin.
So this first poem is called The End of Brother's Tale. Our brother has a tail, and we all play with it. He'd been on the toilet for days. Stomachache, he said. We'd all taken bets. It would either be green or yellow specked with blood. The tail made its debut out his lower back. It was mute, a separate issue from the stomachache. Our brother stayed on the toilet for 13 more days. It grew so much we had to crack the bathroom door and wrap it around the banister, the stairs, let it out into the backyard, and then under the fence to the front yard. It changed the routine for those weeks. There were 2 bathrooms in the house. Brother was in Dad's, so Mom boiled water for his daily use. I was let in the downstairs bathroom. My brothers had the woods to use. Mom would call Dad a dog each night he came home from work, which made him mad, and talk trash, and take his anger out on all of us. Under the light in the street, me and Brother Bernie would jump rope with Brother's tail until Dad would come out and beat us with it. Meanwhile, Brother would be tickled. The faint vibrations of tail against flesh made ignorant pleasure for him. Mom hated that. She'd hear our screams, come out, hit Dad, and at the end, we'd all be sitting in a row, puffy and slapped. Brother's tale grew to the need of wrapping it several times around the house. You wouldn't believe the consideration we had to give. The winters were cold. We had to insulate it to no extreme contrast from the temperature of wherever Brother was. We'd approximate distances for family trips, be sure there was enough tail to make it, adding for the steps we'd take within our destination. There were the smaller pests, ants, for instance, and the snack they'd make of whatever section of the tail was closest. It changed the way we cut grass. Brother developed a complicated fear of not being able to see the end of it. I remember running a line of it through the chimney to the attic and eventually to a small hole in our bedroom. He'd dangle it over himself in small circles until he fell asleep. We wanted so badly for something to happen to it. We dreamt of the tail growing so big we'd have to monitor the time zones, working for years to buy facilities to store it in. All our lives would wilt over the effort of him. This next poem is called Love the Ugly. Our mother's hair fell sharp as razor wire. Her hands morphed to talons. Her smell, wet iron, and for a while, every touch she gave was a cut on us. Every kiss sent toxins into our veins. We could hear how her bones snapped, see smoke exit at each of their breakings, and all through the night we heard her screams. Every story told a curse, making each of us its container. This poem's called Pustule. We started to wonder how big it would grow. Mateo's pustule started harmless, a pinpoint. He went to sleep that night and found a fourth of his neck under it when he woke. He got upset. Mom told him she'd pop it. Better to be asleep than anticipate with eyes closed, she said. It looked alien, a whole being cocooned inside a whole planet. The next night, it ruptures. Pus leaks on his pillow and down the sides of his bed and a puddle halfway down the street. It compelled us, even as the pustule repaired and filled slightly darker, a little blood at the tip. We watched Mom heat a pin till black at the end, then strip it with a swab. Her dig into Mateo was thorough. She drained his green over essence into a cup, stuck a bit of it into some orange juice for his good luck, and into him from the glass it went. Sorry if it's dinner time. Invincibility. Dad left his coffee on the counter. It was the only thing he ever did to make us feel invincible. Each of us put our dusty mitts on the rim, where we knew he wouldn't want them. He'd never drink behind us, always let us drink the white slivers of backwash behind him. He'd hand us the cup or can and tell us to run off with it, not to give it back. That morning, there were 5 of us up and unwashed, each of us with our mouths on his porcelain mug for a sip. It was forbidden. We loved it. We were sure he wouldn't know. We left that mug steaming, the swirled cloud brown liquid at a level we couldn't tell apart from where it was before us. Dad turned the corner in his uniform for work, and we scattered so fast around the house, we ended in the same incriminating spot we started. Dad looked down at us, was menacing. We just wanted something sweet, we told him. Impressed to follow. Even at beatings, we'd line up like little ducks, resigned, mindless. It's gonna hit us now. Stay quiet. It'll go faster. He'll give up. Then we can do something else. We'd take our spreading bruises and scabs outside and try to make nothing from them. We'd eat TV dinners off blue cardboard boxes when the sun went down. Pizza, chicken fingers, battered. I don't think one of us remembers when it got sad. We think Maybe someone must have told us because we never thought about it. Did we need a reason we couldn't give? We followed our dad everywhere. This is called an occasion of potted meat for anyone who remembers eating Vienna sausages. In all of the kitchen cabinets sits blue silver cans of Vienna sausages. We can't wait to pop their tins, drain the liquid from the round of them. 6 standing in a circle at the rim of the can, 1 key locked in the center. They're soft enough to match to bits with the smallest squeeze of our eager and juicy fingers. During the course of our eating, we find pieces of meat migrating to the corners of our lips, the tops of our tongues, and the traps of our cheeks. And while they dwell inside every natural crease of our turning jaws, we're happy to be in conversation with each other as a family of lunch eaters, laughing and smiling, meat falling from our words to our shirts and pants. Our belching forms a cloud full of particle potted meat, plus a sweetness from the fruit juice we're drinking. It spreads throughout the room of our dining to the next room before dissipating completely. We venture to the restroom, returning assured of our ability to eat the remainder of the too much share of meat. Using mouthwash to rinse afterward, we spit out and downward to the sink. A wash of rinse, specked with matched meat. Ask any one of us now as men afraid of nitrates, the pride we had gathered around each other, satiating, working toward finding ourselves satiated, gestures cheap and hard-won, gestures we remember so they won't just be gone. To the sons. When your dad starts following you into mirrors, you'll try to ignore him. The full resolution will keep an outfit of the whole skin you wear, and from where within you'll breathe over the years. Underneath, you'll reach for slight evidence that you're alive and separate. Outside the mirrors, you'll notice when your body swells, it will swell like his. And when it wilts, it will wilt like his. And when it sags, and when it's sick, you'll think how sound it would have been having it all prefaced, saving days trying to picture how you'll both perish. Try not to take badly when somebody tells you how you look. Nice, like him. There will be a world of people doing it. Try your best to say thank you, to give something back. Don't expect them to understand. When you lie in bed, it's him you'll go to sleep with. When you eat, it's his lip that will curl around the food. There will be your body he nourishes. Try to dodge mentioning how when you smear your hands across your face to wash it, you imagine the spread of your features as his. And when you've blotted out all the mirrors, even the darkness you inherit is his. Okay, and I'll just close with one final poem. It's the title poem from my forthcoming collection. It's called A Season in Hell from Beau. I dreamt I was showing my brother around in hell. We started inside the house. Everything was brown besides the white sheets in the bedrooms. I let him look outside the window. Told him it was hottest there, where the flames rolled against the glass, as if a giant mouth were blowing them, as if there were thousands caught in the storm, pushing it onward with mindless running, save a desperation for something else. How had there been a house in hell, and we invited with time to spend? Why was it I hadn't questioned how I got there? My brother growing so tired from the heat? The sweating? Surely we could open the door, he said. Surely there'll be a breeze. Even seeing already. Even burning himself on the doorknob. His eyes turned back in his head, working his way to the bedrooms, staining the sheets with his blistered hands. And though I knew the beds weren't for the rest of any body, I sat by and let him sleep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dustin. I do remember Vienna sausages. My great grandmother used to feed them to me while I sat on the counter while she cooked. So it would be like the sink, me, the stove, and her, and then I would just be eating Vienna sausages. And one time we had chickens, so I took the Vienna sausages into the chicken coop, not thinking, and totally had the most horrifying experience with chickens in my life. So those are my memories of Vienna sausages. Very fond as well as scary.
Yeah, I feel like that's some of the sensibilities in that poem too. But it's fun that your grandma used them as a snack while she was making dinner.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was I had this this habit of kind of like just sitting on the floor and complaining about like being hungry when there was anything, and so she would just be like, well, if you want a snack, here's something to like keep you quiet while I try to get things together. Just kind of like you said, like it's to satiate, right? It's like a textural kind of experience, especially for like kids, it's just easy, right? Despite the smell.
Right.
But I have a question about how straightforward your poems are, because I think that what most people's concept of poetry is that it's very complicated and flowery, right? There's like a code they have to unlock in the poem in order for them to kind of understand it and take everything in. My favorite kind of poetry is a lot like yours. It's very straightforward and direct, and it moves like swiftly. It moves at like a pace. It's almost like a scene from a movie like going right by you. And I wanted to know, like, is how do you do that, right? Because when you look on the page, you have like the words and the sentence structure. And when it's not flowery, it's hard to figure out how someone affects these things because there seems to be only the basics on the page. So how do you construct that straightforwardness in your poems, and what does it do for you as a writer?
Yeah, I think that there's something to like just growing up in the South and this kind of like natural storytelling that kind of renders in the South, being around a lot of people who tell stories about, I don't know, this particular street in this particular part of town, or um, stories about, I don't know, relatives, distant relatives, or even close relatives. But I think when I'm writing poems, I'm most interested in just like discovering or kind of like maximizing the vernacular of the area that I grew up in, right? And kind of like seizing on stories and kind of taking strength in telling like my own stories or recasting experiences that I've had. So I grew up, well, I wouldn't say that I grew up. I started playing instruments in intermediate school. So I started out with the violin, and then I kind of graduated into alto saxophone. And my brother, he plays the drums. So that's the reason I didn't play the drums, because my parents were like, "You can't play we can't have two people in this house playing drums." So I always, I think I take a lot from music and cadence and rhythms and whatnot. So I think that kind of musicality with vernacular language helps me to, I don't know, kind of give everything an interesting kind of narrative momentum, because I'm so invested in storytelling and narrative in my poetry. I think I just use it to facilitate the storytelling. So if I'm telling something like monstrous, there's something soothing about the rhythm of the language that I use to bring those like horrifying narratives to light, I guess. So it's more of a comfort using the vernacular and the kind of musical or the cadence that I kind of like put on.
Could you say more about the vernacular of the region that you're from? Because to me, in some poems, especially in A Family is a House, which is what you read in the show the book again, it sounds sometimes like building a fairy tale, right? A writer that I admire that's not a poet but a fiction writer is Helen Oyeyeme, and her language is somewhat similar as far as being very direct and being very paced, but also like seeming to be using very kind of fable-esque metaphors to kind of get a story across.
Right. Yeah. So I think when it comes to those kinds of fairy tale like aesthetics or like elements in the poetry, I think that's something that I took to as a means of kind of escaping reality, or maybe trying to gain more insight into like the consensus that is reality. So having a lot of internalized experiences or hard experiences. I think like people internalize things very uniquely.
Mm.
So when I write poems or render experiences that kind of escape reality, it kind of enables me to shift the focus to, or it allows my fidelity to be foremost to my internalized experience, or trying to render something true about how I've internalized experiences, rather than, I don't know, worrying about, it's like, well, this isn't how it happened, right? But I think one of the great things about poetry is that you don't necessarily have to render how things happened, but a much more interesting pursuit is rendering how things feel to you, or whatever kind of truth you get, and how you felt about a situation, rather than trying to assemble how something actually happened, because chances are no one's going to agree on that.
Right. And I think that that's like, those are like very important words, like to encapsulate, right? Like I'm telling you like how something felt for my speaker, not actually the kind of mechanics of the event or the moment, because like that dictates memory, like how you felt something, or how much what you experience kind of overtakes your body, like your operations, and your levels of energy really changes like what you put on the page, and like the again, like the Vienna sausage, the texture of what you're giving to your reader. And then I also, because in both A Family as a House and Millennial Roost, this is Millennial Roost, there's this use of the conceit, right? So in the Millennial Roost, there's the long metaphor of the predator as Mr. Hen, right? Instead of a rooster, and thinking about the masculinizing with the Mr. of the hen itself, thinking about the laying of the egg, which would be considered to be something very like feminine, is to give birth, but then having like the transformation or the transubstantiation of that into something else. And then in A Family as a House, the children very endearingly and like sweetly, regardless of the situation, are all these different creatures, and they all come to different lights, and they have these adventures together that make the book, that gives the book a break between the harder moments. And so what does the conceit do for you? Because it seems to be like one of the major tools in your poetic tool belt.
Right. Yeah. I think use of conceit is the most direct access, or the direct plug that I have into creating a transformative experience. I think with something like Millennial Roost, that's all about early childhood abuse or sexual abuse, which is a narrative, as disturbing as it is something that we are familiar with. I guess familiar would be, not to say comfortable, but I guess like a certain kind of comfortable hearing it in certain contexts and whatnot, right? But I wanted to, again, going into this like internalized experience, something that was harder to dismiss, something that kind of defamiliarized what we kind of like have normalized in these experiences, or to kind of like transcend them, and to, I guess, give more attention or more space to the people who actually suffer under these circumstances. So I think the conceit is really good for just defamiliarizing, and really just kind of like not assuming that these experiences have been mined for all that they're worth, and really just pushing myself to find a through line through that metaphor, or that extended metaphor or conceit, to I guess a new insight. It's a way that I can skip being superficial, I guess.
I was speaking with an artist who I'm interviewing for something else 2 weeks ago, and this subject of childhood, early childhood abuse and sexual abuse came up. And we were having the discussion about how the narrative that children are allowed to make about their experience is often one that comforts the adult, right? And the adult kind of like, oh, this is wrong, right? Instead of kind of just accepting the perspective of the child in the moment and not messing with that and allowing that agency. And in the letters in Millennial Roost, that was something I noticed that was very powerful. The speaker returning so much agency to how, when the speakers rendering themselves very young, rendering themselves as they age, like that agency and their opinion of their experience keeps changing and shifting, but allowing the agency to just say things that we would train children to be like, don't say that, that's not correct, is there. And I found that to be like so powerful and important. Could you like say more about that?
Yeah. Um, I think so. I think Millennial Roost is written very pointedly to invite people in. I think there's the first poem, Prelude, is kind of like a used as a filter, maybe to invite only people who are going to have not really like a productive experience, but I guess to filter out predators, right? And I guess it's not a perfect process, and I think in some certain way the speaker is aware of that kind of thing. But I think the agency that the speaker gains from using like the chicken and egg imagery and the conceit of an abuser who is a rooster is just to, I think it makes it harder for readers to turn away, right? So when something is uncomfortable, or when you get into what is the really visceral kinds of I guess like the stark reality of someone being sexually abused in violent ways, like thinking about it in terms of like chickens laying eggs or hens laying eggs, is a way for people to know what they're getting into, but at the same time, I don't know, they can still learn something about the anatomy of chickens, but they're also learning about the sexual abuse too, right? And it's enabling it to be much more personal and intimate than it would be in these kinds of, I guess, like the ugly reality that sexual abuse is, right? But I think because this rendering is happening filtered through the speaker's conscious and unique experiences, that's also a kind of I don't know, that benefits the speaker too, because there's I don't know, I guess there's like a transformative experience for both the reader and the speaker this way, because the speaker is mining the experiences in a way that's unfamiliar, trying to like maximize or trying to get to a place of insight at the end of the book. But then the reader who accompanies the speaker is also benefiting from that. So they're kind of growing together. And I guess like at the end of the book, there's a reach out to the reader again that says, hey, if you felt something special in this, it's like, let's keep each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I really love that gesture to the unresponsive respondent, right? Like the person that won't write back, right? Because I think it's I mean, I like meta gestures, right? Like I'm into that, and so having that reach out, understanding that the reader's response is reading, but not, as a writer, you're not going to get a letter, your speaker's not going to get a letter in the mail, right? Not literally, not going to get a text literally. Just kind of opens up this like multi-dimensional like time space, like it suggests it, and I find that to be very exciting. And so that gesture at the end of the book I also found to be very, very exciting. And on the back of Millennial Roost, Jericho Brown, he wrote a preface. He also blurbed the book. And one of the things he says about your writing is humor and terror bind themselves to one another, which is such, for me, like a very like dynamic, like very beautiful way to show the relationship between like humor and terror. And I think that people are familiar with humor and they're familiar with terror, but not as familiar as why one always follows the other in these, like you're in a horror movie and something happens and instead of screaming, you're like, ha ha ha, you know, or there's an uncomfortable moment and you see something and you laugh before you respond, like have another emotional response. It's almost like your brain trying to figure out, oh, is that real? Did that really happen? And there's almost this like lift, like humor is, did that just happen, more than anything else? And I think in that way, that's why it combines so much with terror. But writing humor is hard. So like, tell us more about writing humorously while also trafficking in terror while you're writing. Because like it's been said over and over again, like timing and humor is really difficult. It's even more difficult when you perhaps are doing it in a darkened space.
Yeah. I I think there's something to, I think like other writers talk about this too, something about sitting with material for so long, and then just going through it over and over and over again. I think in the same way that running or experiencing something uncomfortable can provoke, like, you could laugh at something that's really disturbing, and people recognize that, it's like your nerves, right? Like you're not being inappropriate, even though people might say that that's an inappropriate response. They can kind of understand that it's like a nervous reaction. I think when it comes to writing something like Millennial Roost, like, dealing with chicken and egg imagery, that's kind of its own absurdity, right? And then the opportunity, even with these metaphors being understood, to render like really disturbing things. There's a lot of just like natural humor built into, I guess, like chickens and eggs, like chickens being the brunt of jokes, like why did the chicken cross the road, which came first, all that other corny stuff. Um, but I think it just lends itself to just like the absurdity of the image of like every time that there's an egg that appears in the book, it's a product of the abuse, right? And I think one of the ways of showing one of the distortions of sustaining an abuse like that is to, I guess, insert humor, right? To be able to make something humorous alongside these horrible experiences. And I think there are a lot of models for that too. Like I feel like a lot of Black comedies strike this balance really well too. Like I was thinking about the movie Life today, Eddie
Mhm.
Murphy and Martin Lawrence, and like countless other comedians in that movie. But that movie is so sad and tragic. But I don't know, I feel like I'm almost laughing the entire way through. And it's not like I think that everything is especially funny, but it's just like that bind of like horror and humor. Um, I think it's just very natural in a sense.
I think of don't scare me if I get the name wrong. I mean, I think of Paul Mooney, right? And I think of Richard Pryor, and I think about while their deliveries are very different, I think about how so many of their subjects are just heavy, right? Like they're coming with critique about all of the heavy elements of Black communities, right? The ways that we harm one another, the ways that we deal with being harmed by people who are outside of our communities. And there's this kind of transformation of like sadness into almost what's the word? It's like levity, right? And I that was another part of the question, and thinking of it in like the tradition of like Black American culture, like all the things that we manage to joke about, right? And if you're not in the community or like in on the joke, you might be like, well, that's not funny, right? But everyone else around is laughing, because if you don't laugh, like as my great grandma would say, if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry, right? And so do you have like comedic influences or like storytellers that you return to that dabble in comedy that you kind of look to when you feel like you need a reminder?
I think I don't know, just like I don't even know who wrote Life at the present time, but like I'm thinking about all of those Black filmmakers who done this sort of realm, right? Even like Spike Lee does it a lot. Think about this movie Bamboozled. He does this even in his recent movies. He has this balance too. Um, Certain writers, I don't know. I think like part of humor, even if it's not necessarily imbued, like you can kind of like think that something is funny that might not necessarily be so humorous. I don't know. I think about the storytellers in my family. There's always this mix of like humor and horror. So, and I think like a lot of the people who are accustomed to like Southern kind of like environments where, like there's still features of like segregation and other horrors, right? Being on the side of town and making jokes about it, or like the history of like public pools and making jokes about, I don't know, all the stereotypes, all of those damaging stereotypes, and trying to make something out of them to kind of like avert that kind of hurt, right? Like Black people didn't have access to a lot of these spaces, and that has led generationally to a lack of of knowledge or skill in certain regards that we have to work very consciously to break through. So I think like all of that story, like history, art that kind of engages those kinds of dualities, all of that is an influence for me.
And then on the topic of absurdity too, right? Like thinking about that as a word that kind of encapsulates like the Black experience, right? Like thinking about like an impossibility, like how many impossibilities or absurd actions it took to kind of, or the absurdity of the violences we experience it doesn't make sense, right? It's almost in like processing police brutality, right? There's like an absurdity there to, you know, like what happened recently in Washington, D.C. There's an absurdity to shooting a sleeping person, because we had this image of cops being people, not anymore, but we once had this mythology of cops being people that were supposed to stop danger or intervene in danger, but they've become the danger. And so you mentioned absurdity, and there is kind of an absurdity to the egg, or an absurdity to describing children as kind of creatures that have like their own adventures up against a very real reality that you described for the adults in a family as a house. And could you say more about like absurdity and like its place in the work, but not really as comedy, but thinking about like these things seemingly are supposed to be impossibilities, but here they are and they're happening, and kind of trying to ease people into that jump, right? Absurdity is a jump into a jump of something that should be impossible into reality almost.
Yeah, so I think like part of the I think on a technical level, some of the things that I read about, especially in millennial roots, like a lot of those things going in such an emotional kind of sphere can be very abstract, right? And I think like when we're writing, thinking about poetry, we don't really like abstractions until we advance to a certain level. And I guess like some people who are reading or some people who are writing, they never really become that comfortable with abstraction.
Mm.
So I think um, having the kind of like absurd device, right? Like part of a conceit, part of the effectiveness of the conceit is how well it's carried through. And I guess like filtering the entire book into chicken and egg imagery, or then filtering the entire book in A Family as a House into all of these things that happen off the ground, right? If I only did it for like one poem or maybe like half of the poem, they'd be like, why did you even put this in here? You know, that kind of thing. Um, so I think I don't know. I think the at the end of the day, the kind of absurdity is like its own kind of like breakthrough into emotion, right? Into that abstract space, and it renders it kind of concretely.
Mm.
So I think like some people say that it could be like a break from the horrible of the reality of certain things, but I think most of the time I think of it as just giving me access to a space that's really easy for me to neglect in my like day to day or in my professional life, right? Like emotions or something that I so often have to brush under the rug or like push aside. And all of it's just like in the performance of being pleasant or just getting through, right? And I think poetry um, is a really great venue for kind of recovering all of those things that we repress, and not just to do it abstractly, but to render it into concrete terms that can be shared with other people in some form or fashion.
Mm. And then leading me, my next question. So the next question is just about beauty, right? And it's about how like Yusuf Komunyaka's like first publication was about his experience as a journalist or reporter in the Vietnam War. And there's so much beauty in that book when there are such horrific things going on. And so I think that poets engage in beauty and use beauty in different ways to soften hard experiences. And it's not that there isn't beauty in the book, but you choose other very powerful characteristics other than beauty, right? You're not relying on making things very pretty and attractive to kind of lure people into the hard spaces. And so what's your value around beauty as a poet? and why choose other characteristics over that kind of beautification, like taking, like taking a dead rose and like burying it inside a sunflower, kind of to say, come look at this a little closer. You don't do that at all. And it's more than just the straightforwardness I mentioned before. You're choosing other characteristics like humor, absurdity, fairy tales. You're using technique. So talk to us more about like how you conceptualize of beauty in your writing and why choose other characteristics over that. What does that do for you as like a creative person?
Yeah. So I think the way that I think about beauty most often when I'm thinking about my relationship to poetry is just creating vivid experiences. Um, I think of the poems in A Family's a House as being like 2D animations, um, or paintings that I don't know. Sometimes they move, sometimes they're just more of like interested in like portraiture, I guess. Um, but yeah, I think that there's something about something of the reality of writing about hard things and then rendering them kind of like in these fairy tale directions. There's something to, for me, um, rendering these in grotesque situations,
Mm.
right? So like there's a lot about the body, and I guess in both books, but I think there's a much more chromatic. The poems that appear in the house are much more chromatic. Um, but just the rendering of all of those different colors, right, and textures, I think that that's a kind of beautiful.
Mm.
Um, and I think if people feel anything, like if those visceral descriptions of like the body, or if anything about the emotionality of someone who's being sexually abused or someone who's just abused physically by their parents or something, if there's something that they get or feel in the emotionality of reading descriptions, visceral descriptions of like chickens laying eggs, or I don't know, like a father stepping on his son's head and then like butterflies flying out of the wound. Um, that's beautiful too. If that experience can be communicated through image, I think that that's a kind of beautiful. But I guess like that distortion is one that you gain after you've been through like a series of like violences. So I don't know. I just want to be true. I guess it's a way that I can be true to the distortion that happens in the aftermath of these experiences. And I think if that distortion allows you to communicate effectively in a way that's hard, that's a kind of beauty too.
Thank you. And so I want to turn to your kind of like career, right? And you went from an MFA at Arizona State University to being a doctoral fellow at Florida State University. And this is like very recent, right? Like this is something of kind of like our generation where you go from the MFA to a PhD. And so I know that the MFA is like a terminal degree, right? It's terminal. It's supposed to be like the completion of like your studies of a certain kind of art form, mastering an art. Whereas the PhD is called, it's a philosophy. You're supposed to learn about like the philosophical arrangements that arise in like a discipline. And so what was your motivation to go from an MFA to a PhD? And then also how are those experiences different? How did they differ for you in their curriculum or even in just how they were to you personally?
Right. So I think part of the journey from the MFA to the PhD is just like the necessity of like we're at this weird time where it's like the industry has just changed. It's kind of like, yeah, the MFA, we're gonna still call it terminal, but it's not really terminal. I think
Mm.
especially in poetry, people more and more the university positions are wanting you to have a PhD. So part of it is kind of like this just the necessity of uh how do you distinguish yourself? How do you make yourself competitive when there are so many creative writers who are looking for jobs? Um, when I graduated with my MFA, I didn't have a book published or I didn't even have a book coming out. So the PhD was time, um, and it allowed me to work in a structure that I kind of become more intimate with than I guess like anything besides the academy. Because I think at the point in which I entered my MFA, I'd already been in the academy for 6 years, and so after that it was like 9. Then with the PhD, we're going on like 14. So I'd in a way, it's very practical. But I think so when I think about the MFA, there's much more of a focus on workshop, right? And craft and aesthetics. Um, Transitioning to the PhD, it's much more about history and grounding these things in like kind of like critical conversations and critical knowledge and kind of like the banter of academic delivery. But it also, the PhD feels like one huge independent study where I get to delve into a specific time period and kind of read really deeply and come up with my own insights as far as contributing to the critical conversation. So there's an element of the PhD that isn't 100% creative.
Mhm.
And I would say that I like that because I think all of those critical considerations do add some kind of dimension to your creative practice, even if I don't like to dwell there. Like, I don't think it's the most productive for people who write creatively. And I know that some people feel like it can be damaging, but I haven't found it to be damaging.
So when you were in your MFA, and I'm asking these questions because, I always assume that there are like young writers or writers who are trying to figure this stuff out, right? And so our experiences can kind of help people like make their own decision. And there are also conversations that tend to be had one-on-one, like in private, rather than like, like on a stage more often than not. And so I'm thinking about because I mean, I too finished an MFA and went to a PhD, but they're in different disciplines, supposedly. And so, I'm thinking about just the different interests that you may have. Like, I know you said there's workshop in the MFA, and then there's more of like a disciplinary analysis in the PhD. But what was your focus and workshop? What were you concerned about there? And what did you decide to focus on in the PhD specifically? And did they end up overlapping or connecting?
Yeah, so what was my focus when I was in workshop in the MFA? I think it was just like expanding my toolkit. So it wasn't necessarily like I definitely didn't go to workshop thinking it's like, oh, I'm gonna write these poems that are gonna go, it's definitely gonna go in this manuscript. And then after like taking workshop all these years, I'm gonna have a manuscript that's really, really solid. I think like I was looking to expand like my abilities as a poet in workshop and then having these experiments that I would take to workshop and sometimes they would go over well and then a lot of times they wouldn't and then I would have to deal with that, right? Which I think is like a part of the thick skin that you're supposed to have as an artist when everybody's just like, I don't know, throwing their critiques at you all the time. You just, I don't know, just deal with it. Um, and the PhD, what did I focus on? So I'm a modernist. Um, so I think I tried to specify American modernism, but then you find out how international cosmopolitan modernism is, American, even though American modernism is, and then you're like, okay, well, that was a cool idea. Um, but I think I wanted to take like a kind of a deeper kind of critical look at the aesthetics that I was bringing to like my writing, just to give like a way to more easily um, help the academy identify what I was doing because there's one way that you talk about it, like, I grew up in the South and I had all of these experiences. And then it's another thing to be like, oh yeah, these Southern Gothic traditions and I don't know, also upbringing, Lost Caribbean and all this other stuff, right? Um, so I think it was just in the PhD, it was more making a way for the academy to accept what I was doing or to take it seriously.
Did you feel like the academy was not taking it seriously?
In a certain way, like
Like, were there challenges during these programs?
yeah, like because the major and minor area of study is dictated by time period, that's not always effective, right? So there's a lot of overlap. So I guess like American modernism, like I couldn't do American modernism and Harlem Renaissance because those kind of like overlap, right?
Mhm.
Um, but or like surrealism, those overlap as well. Um, but I don't know, like I think the lack of seriousness applied to I guess what I was doing in my creative work um, was mostly just from not being familiar with the kinds of things that I was bringing to my art, right? And like I said, there's not necessarily a connect between what you decide to focus on as like a scholar and what you do as like a creative writer. Because it's feel like that feature wasn't necessarily considering the creative work that I did, and it's not always the common thing that the creative work that you do considers the critical work that you do. So I think like blending them was something that I had to learn how to do well, and I'm getting there.
And then also thinking about both books, right? And so in the history of Black poetry, we have a few Black poets, right, that don't necessarily um, put first, right, filtering experiences explicitly through, right, Blackness itself, right, as far as stating Blackness plainly in a poem. And I think of course, of like Robert Hayden, right? So he's a Black author, writer, but in his work, it's very much about the intimate, the domestic, the tableau, the image of family, and the experience, right? And we understand through scholarship how this all connects to his experience as a Black poet. And in your work, I see a very similar gesture. It's also a gesture in mine, right? To more focus on the experience and the lived emotion of it and trying to get that clear and expressed with, and then having it be understood like, well, I'm a Black poet and this is my experience. I'm not necessarily gonna like state it in a poem or necessarily foreground a direct relation with a politic, right? Because all of life is politics, and coming from that viewpoint. And I wanted you to talk more about whether or not that was a decision, the place it holds in your work, and how you relate to that trajectory of Black writers that preface the intimate personal before like the artistic politicizing of their Blackness and those other experiences.
Yeah, I know. I love that question. But yeah, I think you captured it really well. Like this idea of like engaging with like politics. I think a lot of Black writers um, do really good work of like responding to social injustices or like specific incidents that keep on recurring. Right. I used to write that kind of way. I think I worked with the phrase like the Black body and was trying to give it some kind of animation. Still trying to get at this like intimate experiences without I don't know, adding like proper nouns to them, like thinking about the Black experience in a whole, right? But I think like I found when I was writing that way, there was so much that I wasn't getting to. Like I felt like so much of my experience was still being repressed under the umbrella or the banner of this duty that I felt like I had to do with engaging in this politics this way. And I think I just made a conscious choice to turn away from those kinds of things. Like there is no pressure to state that, like it's redundant to state that my experience is Black, right? So thinking of ways to kind of like expand or to catch up with these repressed experiences. And I know that for a lot of different writers, like who, I don't know, their experience is they have some proximity to sexual abuse, right? They never get around to writing those kinds of things. So I think like in my work, if I can kind of like supplement to what I guess like the prevailing mode of Black writing is and go to those intimate experiences and really kind of like combat that repression, I think like that's much more rewarding for me personally.
Yeah. And also thinking about what that does for like the image of like the Black masculine, right? Like being able to center repressed, heated, charged, repressed emotional centers that I think often expectations of Black masculinity within and outside of our community kind of puts upon like conceptualizations or limited notions of what like the Black masculine is or entails or has to be or appears. And I think that your work really challenges that in like this subtextual way, right? It's not necessarily like a signpost or a statement. It's not the title of the book, right? But it's like work that you're doing on the page. And is that conscious, or is it more like, is it just happenstance, or is it something that you have thought about?
Yeah, I think it is a conscious kind of choice to not acknowledge anything I already know. Um, because who am I doing that for? It's like there's a way in which like if I'm going to spend time with myself and I'm talking to myself in these poems, it's like I'm not making a kind of easy presentation or an artistic presentation of things that aren't going to help me further myself.
Mm.
So I think at this point it's natural, but I think when I first started thinking about these things and making the transition from one, I guess, would you say mode of writing or to the other one, um, I really had to like search for something that was satisfying. And I think like, we were talking about conceit and absurdity and transformation. Those are the tools that I found to, I guess, destabilize what I thought I knew. So
Mhm.
necessarily going through that route got me away from that other mode of writing that we were talking about.
Right. Like not to like over critique work that does this, but work that's translative of something that someone already knows often leaves me like with like questions, right? And so work that's always presenting questions that you know are new to the writer or gestures that you feel are like kind of new or unexpected always teach me something, right? And I think it may be the difference between like having a poetics that teaches me something and a poetics that affirms me and like comforts me, right? Um, yeah, yeah, and like thinking about it like in these particular ways. And then so just because I'm kind of like inside your life, like I have an idea of publishing, right? Like, and your path to publishing. And so wanted you to kind of narrativize for us, like what it was like to finish the first manuscript, deal with and get a publisher, and then decide publicly, right? To be like, I am not happy, right, in this particular situation, and to like move on, right? And take that agency. Because poetry, publishing poetry is if you're making money at it, like in a sense of like you have like residuals, you're very lucky, right? Like it's a thing. And so because that's so rare, other poets tend to have this like it's like being published is like a gig, right? It's a gig, you get your book purchased, you get the money, and then you just keep going from gig to gig. So could you let, and that's scary, right? And if you have too much of an event, you get worried that your career may be in jeopardy. So could you talk about that process and just dealing with that?
Yeah, so I think like there's a way in which like poetry world, writing world in general kind of imposes if you don't have a book, you're kind of like invisible up until that point, right? So going through my MFA and thinking of like, am I ever gonna have a job? Am I gonna have a job before this age or whatever? Like all these anxieties that the kind of an industry imposes. Like I wanted so badly to have my first book published. And that puts writers in a vulnerable position. They're already in a vulnerable position, but those pressures put writers in an even more vulnerable position. So, I did this typical route of sending out my first manuscript to all these different contests. Um, I sent to an international press called iWork Publishing my book. Oh, I submitted to a contest. It didn't win. It was a finalist, but the director reached out to say that he wanted to publish the book, and I was like, okay, yeah, definitely publish it. It's like everything's going to go up after that. Um, so published it. Found out that the deal wasn't quite what it seemed. Like this director was really bad about just being transparent with his writers, um, fulfilling the contracts, trapping them into these compromising situations.
Mm.
And I guess he had like a meltdown on Twitter. Um, and then, like the impulse would be like, no, the danger now is that like this incident happened. He's threatening to, I don't know, kind of like retaliate against one of his own writers. And I was just like, okay, what am I going to do? It's like if I can fight the situation and try to get the rights to my book back, but then my book would be out of print, and then I don't know what that's going to say about getting a job or just like having a presence. But I think at a certain point in time, I just made the decision. Luckily, I was in that situation with other writers who were on that press, and so we kind of like banded together and helped each other get out of that rocky kind of book deal. Um, and so that was great in a certain way because having that experience so early on uh, taught me a lot about what it's not worth to do, even with like all these different pressures to be published. So I got the second book deal, or the second publisher who wanted to publish mine. That went better. Picked up my first book, which was a very lucky situation because I know some people who were in that situation with that other press haven't gotten their first books or their books with that press picked back up.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I think like with this third manuscript that's coming out, like I just told myself, there's no real pressure. I've got the 2 books out. I can just really take the time to do this right. I'm not going to be settling for a publisher anymore. I'm just going to go with somebody that I really want. And now I'm in a really good position. But that's not to say that everybody, you should wait until you're in a really great ideal situation, because I know that's not always possible. And there's a lot of pressures for writers to have a presence by having a book. So it's just a hard thing to advise on.
Do you have a copy, like a front, like a cover image of the new book?
I do have as a PDF. Yeah, I do.
Are you allowed to share it?
Yeah. I shared it the other day online. Maybe I can put it in the chat.
Yeah, share it and then tell us about it. You know, this is our last question. You know, like tell us about what the next book is about.
Yeah, so
That's such a hard question for poetry. It's like, tell us what you're, it's not like a, but
no, I've had a lot of practice with this question actually. So the next book, it's called A Season in Hell with Rimbaud. It's essentially these 2 brothers. There's an older brother and a younger brother. The older brother's kind of just making his natural descent into hell. And because the younger brother kind of like sees his older brother about to make his descent into hell, he's got this mentality that anything bad that happens to his older brother is eventually going to happen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he just makes the decision to voluntarily go down there with him. And you kind of learn about this kind of fractured relationship they have through this initial kind of like setting. They're in this house in hell, and there's all these flames blowing around the house. But the temperature inside the house is very hot. And so the older brother kind of becomes delirious and restless. He wants to escape. So he gets this idea, because there's wind outside blowing the flames around, that it would be cooler outside.
Mm-hmm.
So he eventually escapes, and he's like running around in the flames. And then like he goes to a point where his brother can't see him outside the window anymore. And so the little brother has to work up to opening the door and going into hell and searching for him. So the poems take his perspective, and he's kind of just ruminating on the relationship while searching hell and these different like realms, looking for his brother.
So it's almost like the divine comedy, but Inferno in particular.
Yeah, there are a lot of elements to I think like A Season in Hell with Rimbaud, like Arthur Rimbaud wrote A Season in Hell, a different kind of context. That was like a romantic context, his breakup from Verlaine, a poet that he was romantically involved with. But there's no romantic. It's kind of like a centering like Black brotherhood in this book, and kind of like initiating a correspondence between the links between Southern Gothic poetics and French symbolism. You kind of learn that they're kind of like influenced. They kind of traded influence with each other, and so there's kind of like a mashup of things happening in this new manuscript.
That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I couldn't get the JPEG in the chat, but it's on.
Email it to me, and we'll share it on Facebook after this is over. We'll just like pop it like into the chat so that way people can see it. But thank you so much for being so generous with your thoughts and your words. And also thank you for your vulnerability. I'm really happy that we got to have this discussion. And Dylan is signed us off already. Great. Oh, no, she didn't. Dylan can take us off. Thank you, Dylan.